Is the college football playoff expanding again? It's a simple question, right? Looks like the SEC and the Big Ten are set to flex their muscle again. And we could be looking at a 14 or even a 16-team college football playoff as soon as 2026. The SEC and the Big Ten, this is kind of their power move, right? They want to expand the CFP now that they control the playoff format, and this is from a 2023 Memorandum of Understanding. But you're looking at a 14 or 16-team playoff model that's on the table, and that would grant 4 automatic bids to each of those 2 powerhouse conferences. The Big 12 and the ACC, those are the other 2 P4 conferences, Power 4 conferences. They would only get 2 auto bids each. Group of 5 would get 1 spot. Notre Dame gets a guaranteed at-large if it is ranked in the top 14 in the 14-team model. I would imagine 16 in the top 16 model. You're looking at maybe massive TV revenue potential. ESPN's already paying $1.3 billion annually for CFP rights from 2026 through 2031. They wouldn't pay more for a 14-team because that was already on the table. A 16-team format could force additional negotiations for even more revenue. I don't expect there to be a ton more added. In fact, this year and last year, 2 of those first-round games have been sold off to TNT Sports. So if you were going to do that, I would imagine ESPN would sub-license some of those first-round games, because if you've got 8 first-round games in a 16-team format, there's nowhere to put them all. Unless you're doing ABC has 1 game, ESPN has 1 game, ESPN2 has 1 game, ESPNU has you'd have to fit them all in, right? So, let's talk about how the new playoff format would work. In a 14-team model, it's a 4-4-2-2, 1+1 model, right? So if Notre Dame doesn't get into the top 14, then you would have 1 wild card, 1 at-large bid. The top 2 teams would get buys. The rest would all play first-round games. So you're looking at 7 first-round games. Is that right? No. You would have 6 first-round games. This past year, we just had 4. In a 16-team model, you get no buys. All 16 teams play in the first round, which means 8 first-round games. Those are going to compete with NFL games. If you're trying to fit them all into a weekend, like I was just talking about, there's not going to be standalone windows. The seeding would be based entirely on the CFP rankings, so it's not like, and we'll get to this here in a minute, but it's not like this would do away with the CFP selection committee. You still need them for rankings, right? SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, he wants to eliminate automatic first-round buys for conference champs. We're going to talk about that in another video. But the Big Ten and the SEC, along with the ACC and the Big 12, they could restructure their conference title games, right? Because this past year, while the conference title games were big viewership, those contracts for those title games are spread out all the way through 2031, 2034 for the SEC, etc. You're not doing away with the conference championship game. Can you reimagine it? Josh Pates talked about this. You could turn it into play-in rounds for the lower-seeded teams. So you're not going to do away with the conference championship game, but potentially you could maybe do 1 versus 2 for the championship, and then your playoff spots would be up for grabs, where your 1 and 2 are already in, but let's just say 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. The winner of those 2, so your 6th place team in the conference standings would have a shot to get into the playoff. Pretty crazy to think about. There is pushback, of course, from the Big 12 and the ACC and the Group of 5, etc. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, said it needs to be a true championship, not artificial, not an invitational. Now, in my opinion, it's already basically an invitational, right? The biggest brands typically get in anyway. At least with this, you know exactly what you're playing for. You know what wins count most, etc. It's based on standings. So in the NFL, you know, your record, you are what your record says you are. And we know that's not always the case, but you know that if you have this particular record and wins over these teams or whatever, you know where you sit in tiebreaker situations, etc. Seems like a pretty good idea to me. The Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, He is running data analysis to fight the SEC and the Big Ten proposal. The problem is there's not a whole lot of data that can fight against what the Big Ten and the SEC are wanting because they have weighted power, weighted votes when it comes to the 2026 CFP. Group of 5 leagues obviously want more than one auto bid. The American Athletic Conference Commissioner, Tim Pernetti, he is pushing for expanded access. I don't think he's going to get it. And then the biggest one, the one that could actually change this, is ESPN. They obviously have concerns. They don't want to alienate fans in regions that are outside of the SEC and Big Ten control. The problem with that is that the SEC and the Big Ten showed this past year that it's all about the viewership from those huge teams. The ACC did not draw anything. Their most watched games all year, the ACC's, were against SEC teams. I don't imagine that ESPN is going to have a ton of concerns with this so long as it keeps the Big 12 and the ACC and the Group of 5 and Notre Dame involved. The real issue is when it comes into the 2030s and you try and break away the SEC and the Big 10 from everybody else. That's what you don't want to have happen.
We're proudly supported by Go Sleeves, the best kinesiology technology on the market. Go Sleeves' patented compression sleeves, socks, and more increase blood flow and lymphatic flow to help your body recover, manage pain, and maintain peak performance. Right now, you can save 15% by going to gosleeves.com/WCE or by using the promo code WCE on their site. Go Sleeves. It's go time.
So, when you look at this, the end game is obviously more money, more power. Maybe you can find a way to meld the two to where more money, more power also fits with who can get into this playoff and how can it be, quote-unquote, fair for everybody, right? There's a chance that by doing this, by granting 4 AQ bids, the SEC would move to a 9-game conference schedule. The SEC, I believe, would be more willing to do that if it did open up for a 9-game conference schedule. Or if it did open up 4 AQs, then you're not as worried about it because taking a loss doesn't necessarily hurt you as much. It opens the door for a Big Ten SEC non-conference scheduling partnership, right? If you think about it, this year we've got LSU and Texas and Ohio State. You could see LSU and Michigan, Georgia and Oregon, Alabama and Penn State, whatever. You could see games like that more often because losing those games is not necessarily going to hurt you as much in regards to getting into the playoff, which is what everybody's wanting to begin with. If you have 4 automatic spots, you don't have to worry about it because what happens in your conference is what really, really matters. The non-conference game matters for seeding. That's where it comes in. But if you do a Big Ten SEC non-conference scheduling partnership, there is a chance TV networks could pay 8 figures for these matchups in a separate media deal. Now, how that would work, I'm not entirely certain because it is my understanding that home games for these teams are the property of whatever network has the conference, right? So with the Big Ten home games are owned by Fox, CBS, NBC, Big Ten Network, which is a Fox entity. With the SEC, ESPN owns the rights to all of those home games. So would you have to do neutral site? I'm not entirely sure how this would work with a separate media deal, but obviously I'm certain they will figure that out. Conference Championship Weekend could be restructured. We've talked a little bit about this. You create more revenue-generating play-in games, right? So you're 1 versus 2, you're 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. You can create 3 games. And we've talked about this on this show multiple times. The most valuable asset for college football is inventory. So the more games you got, the better it is. And people don't feel as bad about getting these players to play more games because they are now making money. And especially with the House settlement, it's scheduled to go into effect in June or July, sometime this summer. The kids are going to be making money from the school. So, it is what it is. So let's look at some final takeaways from this. Playoff expansion seems inevitable. You've got a decision coming really in the next few weeks. I believe this coming week we have got, I believe on Wednesday, there's a CFP meeting. The SEC and the Big Ten, they are going to secure their dominance in this. They have the power. They have weighted power, so their votes mean more. In the next iteration of the CFP, that's going to leave the Big 12 and the ACC kind of scrambling for relevance here. TV money will obviously drive the final decision. If ESPN is not willing to put more into it, you're probably only going to see 14. If ESPN says they might be willing to look at an additional game, you could see 16. My guess is it sticks on 14. ESPN's input could slow down some of these more aggressive moves, right? Here's what we know. The landscape of college football is changing. It has been changing. It has been changed. Everything is different. The question really is, are we heading towards a two-conference superpower model? That's what we need to be worried about. As it sits right now, a 14-team playoff with AQs and whatnot does not bother me in the slightest. Honestly, it doesn't bother me really at all. And so I'm totally fine with it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.